Read your Bible.
Read your Bible, idiot.
Hello! Time for another day of Bible. Today we're going to be in Genesis 6. We're going to be talking about Noah. So let's look first at verse 1 through 4. Actually, let's look at 3. Nope, look at that. I've changed it again. All right, we're going to start off by looking at verse 2, and it says, when men began to increase in number on the earth and daughters were born to them, the sons of God saw that the daughters of men were beautiful, and they married any of them that they chose. So we have this issue of sons of God and daughters of men. There's several different ways that people look at this. Number one, and this used to be like the traditional one that everybody talked about, was angels marrying human women and then having children, and that's where we'll get to the Nephilim, which we'll talk about in a second. That's not what all scholars think today. Some scholars believe that the sons of God refers to Seth's line, which looks like this, that we talked about yesterday, and the daughters of men refers to this line. And so what it's doing is it's talking about how those two lines are intermarrying. And in Cain's line, they were growing more and more away from God. And so Seth's line was trying to stay true to God, and so that mixing, normally when a believer and a non-believer hook up or they get married, most of the time the believer is the one who ends up changing and becomes less following God. I know it's going to be tough for some people that don't believe that people can walk away from being saved, but the truth is that most of the time the non-believer will pull the believer away from God. It doesn't always happen that way, but most of the time. So some people think it's a warning because of that. Other people think it's that the sons of God refers to kings or other powerful people, and they are just taking whichever women they want for like their harems and whatnot, and talking about how their harems are growing, and so forth. There's a few different interpretations for that. I think the one you'll hear the most often is the idea of angels marrying women. It's a little hard to say if that's even possible, but it's the traditional view, and so most people just kind of accept it by default. I think you'll probably see more theories of this in the coming years about what this is referring to. But in verse 3 it says, my spirit will not contend with man forever, for he is mortal. His days will be 120 years. And so we have this number 120 years. Again, there's two different schools of thought on this. Number one, that would be 120 years from the time God says that until the time the ark is built. Basically, you have 120 years before everybody's wiped out. Secondly, some people believe that it's referring to people's lifespan. Before this point, as we saw in the timeline of people's lives, people were living hundreds of years and whatnot. From this point forward, you start seeing the lifespan go down until it's basically around that 120 range. There's a few exceptions here and there. Abraham lives a little bit longer. But generally speaking, people live between 100 and 120 years, sometimes 80, kind of more what we think of as our normal lifespan now after this point. In verse 4, it says, the Nephilim were on the earth in those days, and afterward, when the sons of God went to the daughters of men and had children by them, they were the heroes of old, men of renown. Or renown? Either way, renown or renown, people knew about them. And so it talks about the heroes. And again, you see this Nephilim idea that maybe they were part angel or whatever, and that's why they were so powerful, that they were giants. Later on in the Bible, it'll refer to children of the Nephilim being giants, like their descendants being giants, particularly when the Israelites come into Canaan. It talks about them being giants descended from the Nephilim. Then, obviously, you know the story of Noah's Ark, how God is going to come and sees how wicked the world is, and he's going to destroy it. But verse 8 says, Noah found favor in the eyes of the Lord.
Noah found grace in the eyes of the Lord. Noah found grace in the eyes of the Lord. That is the reason the scripture forward. Noah found grace in the eyes of the Lord.
It says Noah was righteous. He had 3 sons, Ham, Shem, and Japheth, and they're going to build the ark. Notice that God sees how corrupt the earth had become, for all people on earth become corrupt of their ways. The whole earth was full of violence. There was so much killing, that there were wars and murders and whatnot, that there's a chance that the human race is going to wipe itself out. And so the flood is not necessarily just God's punishment, although I think we can look at it that way, God's justice or God's wrath. It's also God saving people, as he always does, that his actions are motivated by redemption and by love. So he tells Noah to build an ark. This is in verse 15, Genesis 6:15. He says, or 14, I guess, make yourself an ark of cypress wood, make rooms in it and coat it with pitch inside and out. Okay, so first of all, the cypress wood, sometimes you hear it called gopher wood. Identifying plants and animals from ancient manuscripts is very difficult. It's hard to do translations because there's no frame of reference. Like if there's a sentence, I can kind of figure out what the sentence is, figure out what the noun and verbs are from other contexts. When it's just an animal's name, it's hard to know exactly what that animal is. And so a lot of times in the Bible, you'll see a little footnote that says the exact identification of this plant or this animal is uncertain. And that's because we just don't know because of the translations. We're just not sure exactly what those words mean. Okay, but then he's going to build it, and it says the ark is to be 450 feet long, 75 feet wide, and 45 feet high, with 3 decks. 450 feet long is about the length of a football field, including the end zones, and it's about as wide. It's not quite the same, but about as wide. So basically looking at an ark the size of a football field, and then having 3 decks in it. So if you add all that space up, you get about 570 railway cars. So sometimes people ask, you really fit all the animals on there? If you think of how long a train is, and if a circus travels with a train,
Afro circus.
But then you can see that there's enough room for animals to travel that way. So in this case, I think there's enough room. 570 cars is a lot. I think a lot of that is probably me hand over to food, and we'll see why in a second. First of all, we have a couple questions to ask. Number one, how many animals go on the ark? A lot of people obviously think it's animals come in 2 by 2, but that's not exactly the case either. Chapter 7, verse 2, take with you 7 of every kind of clean animal, a male and its mate, and 2 of every kind of unclean animal, a male and its mate, and also 7 of every kind of bird, male and female, to keep their various kinds alive throughout the earth. So what you see is you see 1 pair of unclean animals, 7 pairs of clean, and 7 pairs of birds. Some scholars say that should just be 7 birds or 7 unclean animals rather than 7 pairs. So it's either 7 or 14, depending on how you add that up. But notice that it's not just 1 pair of every animal. And we'll talk a little bit more about clean and unclean animals later on. The main thing is that some of those animals are going to be used for sacrifices and for grazing and for livestock, for domesticated livestock, and so that needs to be repopulated quickly. There's a lot of reasons why they might be more of the clean and unclean ones, more of the clean than the unclean ones, but that's probably one of the reasons. And then the second question is how many people go on the ark? There's 8. It says Noah, Ham, Shem, Japheth, and their wives. So 4 of the guys and then their ladies. Next question is how long are they in the ark? A lot of times people think that it's 40 days they're in the ark. That's how long it rains. It rains for 40 days. But they're actually, if you look at the end of chapter 7, it says the waters flooded the earth for 150 days. So it rains for 40 days, and then the waters cover the earth for 150 days. Then they have to wait for it to dry. So all told, they're in the ark for about 375 days, a little more than a year before they come out. Sometimes people ask about where did all the water come from. So if you look at chapter 7, verse 20, it says, the waters rose and covered the mountains to a depth of more than 20 feet. So basically saying that the water was higher, it was 20 feet higher than the highest mountain. There's some debate about whether there's enough water on the earth for that even to happen. So if you look at the footnote there, for most Bibles, it'll say, or rose more than 20 feet and the mountains were covered. There's a chance that the earth was more flat. Not flat like flat earth, crazy talk, but like flat like without mountains and hills and stuff. So just like gently rolling hills. And as the water rose 20 feet, that was enough to bury all the mountains. So again, it depends on your view of creation. If you believe that the flood brought in all the geological changes and whatnot, then obviously you could believe that more. If you believe that the geology was there first, then going 20 feet over the mountains might be a little more problematic. But in any case, there also is an argument that the floodwaters did not flood the entire globe, but rather just mainly the Middle East, like where people were living. The phrase "the whole world" is used other places in Genesis to mean either the known world or kind of as a figure of speech. So, for example, it'll say that the whole world came to Egypt to buy food from Joseph. That doesn't mean that every single person on the planet came to Joseph. It means like the whole world. Everybody was coming from everywhere because no one else had any food. So it could be a sentence like that. Let's do one more note here and then we'll stop for the day. And this is the first thing that Noah does when he comes out of the ark. That is to build an altar. And so sometimes people ask where the ark is. Obviously, some people think it's on Mount Ararat, depending on where Mount Ararat is. But of course, we know. But there's a lot of different places where the ark could be if it's still there. To me, it seems pretty obvious that if they're going to come out and build an altar first, they need wood, and all the wood is been soaking for 150 days except for one place, which is the ark. So if you're going to build an altar or you need wood to make food or whatever, why wouldn't you just use the wood that's sitting right there? So I think that we probably won't find the ark, or if we do, it'll just be pieces of it because they probably burned it right away. They got ready-made wood right there. That's really common in history for societies to take the remains of old buildings or whatever to build again. Last thing I'll just add, just as a side note, in chapter 9, it says, everything that lives, this is verse 3, everything that lives and moves will be food for you. Just as I gave you the green plants, I give you everything. So at this point, it looks like prior to the flood, everybody was a vegetarian. But after the flood is when we can start eating meat. So this is why we can have barbecues and sausage and all that delicious stuff now. So before the flood, everyone's vegetarian. After the flood, everybody's happy. And there's a rainbow to celebrate the first barbecues. Talk to you tomorrow.
Read your Bible.
Read your Bible, idiot.